Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the NISEI interview series. I'm your host, Code Marvelous, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Holly Chandler, the creative director for Project NISEI. Thank you very much for coming on the program, Holly.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
So, we're doing kind of this round the table series with all of the members of the board, and we're going to kind of dig in to your specific element of the board, what kind of your purview and your role is going to be going forward as far as continuing the game now that official support is more or less ended. We have a couple tournaments to clean up. But before we get to that, I want to dig into a little bit more about you personally so that members of the community who may not be familiar with you may get to know you a little bit better as part of this interview. Can you tell me a little bit about your Netrunner story, like how you started playing and what kind of hooked you about the game?
Well, so I started way back. I bought the game in 2013, seeing like on the board gaming subreddit and Board Game Geeks and stuff, seeing this game that had all these super great ratings, and it sat on my shelf for a while. And finally, in early 2014, I pulled it out with a friend, just the core set, and said, you know, we're going to play this game. We're going to learn it, because it's supposed to be really good. And we played it, and we liked it. And I went to my local store, and I was buying, like, I think Creation and Control when it was super new or something like that. And they just told me, like, oh, we have this group that comes and meets up on Wednesdays and plays. And that was kind of my first foray into it. The people that I met, I think, I don't think I could have met a better group of people to get into it. And so that was a super great start to the game for me. But since then, I've been really involved in the local scene. I've gone to a few like national tournaments, and I went to my second Worlds. And other than that, I think the biggest thing that I would be known for is Watchdog, which is a campaign that's sort of a spiritual successor to Monitor, which is one of the official novellas, and it was supposed to be sort of in the direction of Terminal Directive, but a little more story heavy and like quirky mechanics and things like that. And that got a way better reception than I ever could have imagined. So
Yeah. I know that Sanjay and I had a great time playing it on this channel back when you first released it. That narrative campaign was a ton of fun.
thank you.
So when you think about, I feel like you have a story similar to some of the other people that I've spoken to, guests, board members, but also it's just, we keep coming back to this theme that it's the people that really make Netrunner worth playing. And that's something that comes up time and time again. And I think that's especially going to be true with members of the board, such as yourself, people who are willing to carve out a significant portion of your free time to try to continue the game. Those are going to be people who have had really positive experiences generally with the community and the game.
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit. We're going to dig into a little bit more of the getting to know you. Tell me a little bit more. Like, can you pick, I know it's hard to nail down, but could you pick some of your favorite Corp and Runner cards and tell me why you like them?
So I'm probably going to get some flack for saying it, but I think the most fun I think there's kind of a point in everyone who plays card games, and like especially with Netrunner, where you realize you kind of know what you're doing, and like you feel maybe that you've become good at the game, sort of like when you understand what all's going on. And for me, that was when I played Butcher Shop, and I think because of that, my two favorite cards of all time are Breaking News and Scorched Earth. Not because I think they're healthy in the game by any means, like they should be gone, but I just have a lot of really good memories of like bluffing out a Breaking News turn 1 and then getting a kill turn 2 and things like that. I think a big thing that draws me to Netrunner is the whole like psychological and bluffing aspect. And so I think those were very big things for me because I like yellow a lot. And so those were big things for me to really like click with Corpse and finding the play styles that I like. as far as runner goes, I love Anarch, and I think if anyone doesn't know me elsewhere, like my screen name everywhere is Break One Barrier for Quetzal. Quetzal was my favorite runner for a long time. But I love Anarch stuff. I loved Noise. He was one of my all-time faves. I'm trying to think of a card that I really like the design of.
Noise is basically the best, and
Yeah,
really, really sad
absolutely.
that he's gone, because he is, in fact, the best.
He is, in fact, the best.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I miss Noise.
I do,
That
too.
is actually my favorite, along with Data Sucker, the Noise alt art is my favorite art they've ever done. I think otherwise, even just in terms of more modern cards, like I love the design of Pad Tap. I think Pad Tap's a really well designed card. Um,
Yeah, I love Pad Tap. Well, it's really interesting how in the last cycle or two, we've gotten a lot of, like, nuanced versions of cards that were broken before.
yes,
Right?
absolutely.
Where it's just like, hey,
Like,
how about you get, like, Pad Tap, which is like a weird kind of cred denial because it doesn't actually prevent them from
penalize.
getting money. It just
Yeah.
disincentivizes them from doing it. Like,
Absolutely. And I
that
think
kind of stuff.
a really great, actually, example, now that you mention that, is I mentioned this in my interview with Johnny Milton, screen name Johnny Milton. I think one of the coolest things that they've done with a lot of these cards too is that they've given them a flavor reason to work, like a thematic reason. And my biggest example was Account Siphon and Diversion of Funds. Like the biggest differences between those cards are Diversion of Funds taking an extra click, and you don't get a tag, but you get less money. And like from a flavor standpoint, that's, you know, you're not siphoning the funds directly into your account, and so you're not getting the tags because it's harder to trace, and you're spending more time because you're having to send them to like a shell corporation or something, and so you're getting less money out of it. And so I like that they took, it's like exactly what you said, where they took those cards and made them a little more balanced, and then they kind of gave them a flavor reason for doing so.
Right.
Like it wasn't just a little one-off, like, oh hey, let's just fix this and throw it back in.
I agree. Yeah, and I think a lot of that, you can see that very clearly in the designs.
Mm-hmm.
So, explain to our viewers a little bit more about your board position and how you're going to be helping the game move forward after the official end of FFG support. Let's start there. What is the role of the creative director going forward?
So I think one of the biggest things that attracted so many people to this game is how easy it is to get sucked into the universe. I think, I mean, even if you're not taking part in all the extra like flavor stuff, the novellas, the novels, the worlds of Android, a lot of the story and a lot of the themes are still present just in the cards. And so I think it's kind of an intimidating undertaking to try and maintain that, but I think it's an important part of if we're wanting to continue this game going forward and we're wanting to keep people engaged and interested, that a lot of that charm that comes from that story and the aesthetics and the universe are all still there, because that's just a big thing that I think helps keep the game so interesting too, in addition to its super fun, you know, mechanics and gameplay. But the fact that the universe is so developed it's a pretty big deal. And so I think it's going to be important going forward to try and not only make mechanics new and interesting, but keep the story going.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with that 100%. And I think that the lore of Android is 100% integral to, you know, in addition to the mechanics, Netrunner is not like any other card game.
Absolutely not, yeah.
And the lore and the very subtle story that's told with the cards. Now, Netrunner can't claim to have a monopoly on that. Other card games have done it to greater or lesser degrees.
Yeah.
But I do feel that there's a realness, like a grounding in our own world, and a kind of evocative nature of the cards that you don't really get with a lot of other games.
Absolutely.
So
And I think the genre too is perfect for that, because with cyberpunk we get this fantastical aesthetic, but at the same time a lot of it's grounded in our current world and
right, it's not
has ties to our current world.
it's not like, hey, there's planes and like there's dragons and orcs and stuff. It's like, hey, what might our world look like in 60 years? Kind of deal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, how are you going to be interacting with the community? You know, what's going to be a lot of how you're going to be kind of boots on the ground with the community, and what can people look forward to you, from you and your role and the volunteers that work with you as far as updates going forward, besides, you know, in addition to like cards maybe, or how would that be done? Talk to me a little bit about kind of like the nuts and bolts.
I think as far as card games go, there's a lot of people that are really invested in this IP. And I know I've seen just in passing conversation in like Stim Slack and similar things to that, there's been so many people that have said things like, oh, have you considered, I had someone literally today submit to us saying like, have you considered maybe a Brazilian setting? Or, you know, everyone has these settings that would be perfect for Android to explore, but they just never got around to.
Sure.
And because people are so invested in this IP, you know, they want to see these settings reflected too. And so I think the community giving feedback on what they like with the story and how, you know, parts of the story they are interested in can help us not only maintain the type of storytelling and the type of narrative that FFG's given us so far, but if there's certain maybe geographical regions that haven't been as represented as before, people can give us their input and say maybe, you know, hey, we haven't had a you know, a setting in Brazil, or a character that is like another example is
Proper Europe.
Proper Europe, absolutely. And like Dan Clark, one of his things he said after in the run announcement was when it was being more talked about that Nero was trans, he said one of his biggest regrets was not like signposting it more, because on one hand, like their mentality is it shouldn't be a big deal, which is absolutely great, but on the other hand, when they're trying to represent a minority and let people see themselves in the universe, they need to be able to see themselves. And
sure.
With Nero, I don't think a lot of people knew until they came out and said it. And
yeah,
so
he did that group of tweets right when the announcement happened, where he was like, by the way, this character's gay, Nero is trans, this person's bi,
absolutely.
and he just went like down the list. And I think, like, while we're on that, I think it's important to just kind of double back on the fact that, you know, with the exception of a handful of characters, almost everyone in the Netrunner world is of a group that would be considered a minority in Western society today.
Absolutely. I think that's a big draw to a lot of people with the game. And I think that's also kind of part of what dictates the community towards the really welcoming and socially liberal mindset that it has is, you know, all of these minorities are being represented in the cards, and so people who might normally not feel as welcomed at the stereotypical, like, cisgender, straight, white, male sort of board gaming events get to see themselves in these characters and say, oh, you know, well, I get to see a black person that's a hero, a Latina person that's a hero, you know, an agender person that's a hero in this game. And so FFG's done fantastic with that. And I think that's part of what has me so in love with this universe.
Yeah, I mean, I know for me, you know, even being a white dude, like a big part of this game for me was the fact that it was a game that reflected a world that I wanted to see. You know, and
Absolutely.
There's a ton of problems with the Android universe, and that's part of why we love it too.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's still a dystopia.
Right.
But
the idea of it just being that everybody's like being mixed is just like not a problem, because on a long enough timeline, roughly everyone in metropolitan society would be.
Absolutely.
And things like that. And I just really, it just was very nourishing to have that as just kind of, again, just like, this is the game. So, like, we can make people not white or make them mixed or gay or trans. So we're just going to, instead of just having them be the neutral, which is white.
Yeah.
Which is ostensibly white in our society. So,
yeah.
While we're on that note, let's talk a little bit about we talked about some of your favorite cards, but what's kind of some of your favorite lore nuggets? And you can go really granular with this, or you can just talk about like a couple of big themes that you really like.
Oh gosh,
you can also talk about Quetzal if you want, since I know you want to.
I do love Quetzal. Gosh, there's so much in the lore to this game that really draws me to it, and that I think makes it really special. And one of it, I mean, it's repetitive, but it's that element of minorities not being minorities anymore. And at the same time, it's like we see, like there's way less racial minorities, because at this point in the future, like you said, it's almost impossible to be not mixed of some sort.
And we also have a new minority, which is part of the dystopian element of Android, is a lot of these racial things may have gone away because there's a new group to be oppressed.
And that was exactly what I was getting to, actually, which is, I think is great, is even though this is, like, cyberpunk is a political genre, and so we're always going to see social criticisms in it. And in this scenario, we see people who are racially mixed, who are gender and sexual minorities, not being oppressed for those things, but not ignoring those issues in our current society. And so we see them reflecting those issues with like Human First and Gentechi's views towards the clones they made, where clones are not people. And so we see all of these little social nuances that are still present, but in a different light, and it forces us to look at them in a different light, and just from a different perspective that we usually would consider it in our current world.
Yeah. I mean, I think Lucas and Damon and Dan Clark and the other people who had a hand in kind of building this lore, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I think it taps into something that is in a lot of science fiction, but also cyberpunk as well, that humans are tribal by nature. But if there's something that can happen that can make the entirety of the human race one tribe versus a new other, then a lot of times maybe you can see those types of group-based tribes go away. And in this case, it's the androids. The androids become a global outsider group, which make distinctions of colorism and gender and sexuality perhaps less meaningful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I love it, even though it's dark as hell.
Oh, I do too. I love the dark as hell stuff. But
so who's your favorite character from a lore perspective in this game, and why?
Oh, that's really tough, because I don't actually think it's Quetzal. I do love Quetzal, but I don't think they got quite as much story as they could have. I think my favorite's probably Chaos Theory. Because she did have some like story inserts, and we were first introduced to her when she was a kid, and then we see her in this revised core set where she's grown up. And so there's a hint of storytelling just in that alone, and that her, she got new art where she's grown up. And
yeah. And there's also the implication that she contributed to the Flashpoint crisis.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the whole, she's got a literal addiction to data, which I think is an interesting, I guess, perspective that we don't normally think of when we think of like hacking into stuff is her like one of her whole nuances is that she's got data addiction, and so she's
Right.
I don't know. It's sort of this weird.
She's
like,
doing it She's a shaper, but she's doing it compulsively because she is addicted to that high of like stealing the pay data, basically.
Absolutely, and I think it's an interesting thing that we don't see as often in like cyberpunk. But it's a cool thing. It's like it's something that's kind of dark to think about, but I don't know. It's fun and it's something I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, I like that. So, what's an ID that you really like, but you wish had landed, but did not land and did not really find its place in the meta?
Oh, I have a handful. I think the biggest one that I've historically been the most vocal about was Satyr Laboratories, the Hospiroid from Terminal Directive. I really love its thematics and its mechanic, because HP's always had a ton of ice that you can click through and a ton of upgrades that make you lose clicks. And so on paper, I really loved the ability and the thought of like, there's so many different things you could, like directions you could go with it. You could recur econ. In my Terminal Directive campaign, I played like snares, and so anytime he would click something, I'd put a snare in R&D. And it was one of those things that I thought was super cool an idea, but it was too easy to play around in practice, and so never got to really see a lot of use.
Yeah, and I think you're right there, and it's not strictly an economic ability; it's a tempo ability, and it was competing with so many just like straight economic abilities in HB that it just didn't have a good chance of being picked over other identities.
Yeah.
Though that's always been the story of HB is
oh, absolutely.
People are always going for the economic IDs over any of the more interesting abilities or nuanced abilities.
Yeah.
Which,
no, absolutely. It was like the biggest thing was it was like, why play any ability or any ID when you could just play ETF, sort of thing, until it rotated, of course. But
yeah, absolutely. So, getting more down to like the actual nuts and bolts of being the creative director and kind of moving the world and the lore forward for Android Netrunner or NISEI Netrunner. NISEI Runner. What drew you to this position? Like, what is the thing that, you know, when you were applying for this position that you're like, oh, I can't wait to work on this? You know, tell me what element of the job most attracted you.
I think it is... I think a big thing for me when I was making Watchdog was it wasn't something that I'd really sat down and intended to say, like, I'm going to make this project and I'm going to do this. It was just kind of something I did in my free time that ended up coming together into a whole thing. And I think it's just so fun to think of things from that perspective of tying this narrative into the gameplay and reflecting both like the story in the gameplay and the gameplay in the story. It's a really interesting and fun perspective to take over just a card game you play. It's something that I haven't really had that cool spark with in any other card game or board game or video game or whatever that I've played. But I love reflecting that narrative in the cards and whatnot. I think it's super cool. FFG's done a great job with it, and I'm excited to give it a try.
Yeah, so what do you think when you think about, you know, this kind of lore reflected in the cards? Can you share any gameplay moments or community moments that really kind of stand out to you as memorable, either things that you personally experienced or that you experienced as part of your group, that, you know, any of those kind of like special community moments?
I think probably the two most notable were the first being when I was first getting into the community, like I mentioned before. I don't think he's taken part in any like national things really, but if anyone knows Anthony Pearson, um, he was the first person I met at the local store, and he is one of the most genuinely like friendly people you'll ever meet in your life. And coming into this new community and this new game, um, and not really knowing what we're doing and not really knowing how to play, um, it's daunting, like for any sort of game you're trying to get into. And I think I very distinctly remember the first meetup I went to, and it didn't feel like, we were encroaching upon their space, or, they were being forced to teach us, like, oh, well, we want more people to play with, so we got to teach them kind of thing. Like, I still remember every person that was at that meet because all of them were excited for new people and excited to get us involved in the game and teach us the game. I think that was the first one. And then the second one actually would probably be, I think a lot of people would agree, is Magnum Opus, just from a week or two ago, or however long it's been now.
3 weeks.
Yeah, 2-3 weeks now. I've not gone to any sort of big national thing in a couple of years, and so getting to put faces and everything to the names of these people that I've known online, and just spend the weekend with them celebrating this game was phenomenal. It was absolutely incredible, and everyone, not only was everyone so nice, but getting to see like how creative the community was. There were so many people that had like alt arts they made. Like I played against Neuropanzer Michael, and we finished our game, and he gave me a bunch of little Think Loaf click trackers.
They're the best.
They're the best. I absolutely love them. And we just like finished our game, and he's like, "Here, some of these are for you." And so it was just cool seeing how like creatively talented and just kind the community is. And it was a whole weekend of that, so it was great.
Yeah, it was really good. Magnum Opus was really incredible. I was really excited to be there, not just because I got to meet you and so many other amazing people, but also just because the energy around the tournament was so much more positive than I was anticipating. It was really lovely.
Absolutely.
So, when you think about the future of the game, what are some of the challenges do you think that we're going to face inside kind of your sphere of expertise? And how can the community help you overcome kind of any of the challenges that you've identified?
So I think for NISEI as a whole, I think it's going to be making sure people are really aware of how organized play is continuing. A lot of people think it's quitting, and so I think we have the potential to continue organized play for a long time, as long as people are aware that we're putting that initiative forward. As far as my own department goes, the biggest thing I thought a lot about this topic, and the biggest thing I think I can think of is we talked about people getting invested in this universe, but I think one of the biggest examples I can think of is I'm pretty sure every single local meta in the world has 1 or 2 or 3 people that always play that one runner, or that one corp.
I feel very called out.
You're very called out right now. Like, you with like Smoke and Professor, hung out with a guy that I've known for a couple of years on Twitter, and finally got to meet in person at Magnum Opus, Keith, who got an Atom tattoo. He's being an Atom, and so all these people that have these characters that they really strongly identify with, be it aesthetically or mechanically or story-wise, I think that's something really cool about Netrunner, that people are able to reflect themselves in them and grow that attachment to these characters. And I think a big thing that is going to be a challenge that I really hope I can continue doing, even in just half the capacity that FFG did, is still be able to provide like the depth and multifaceted characters that people can see themselves in and grow attached to, and become a little more sentimental with than just playing a card game.
I mean, yeah, that's the ideal, right? The ideal
Absolutely.
is
Yeah.
that from a creative standpoint is that you'd have people get really invested in not just the abilities of the characters, but the characters themselves. Like, one of the reasons I've always been attracted to Noise, Geist, and Smoke is that their mechanics are different than other people who play the game. So it's like they have their own version of Netrunner that they play.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It creates like a different story of how they're hacking. And also, they're all trash.
And they're all trash. And I love it.
And they're all trash. But yeah, and I think that's a big part of it when you have people who are really devoted. And I think that's why, even though Wayland was bad for a really long time,
oh yeah,
you had people who were really devoted to it, because even though the cards were not great, the theming of Wayland throughout the entirety of Netrunner's official run was just incredible. It was incredibly
they had some
evocative.
of the best themes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a local guy in my meta who he has played Wayland since day one. Like, since he was getting into it about when I was. So for 4 years now, he's been a exclusive Wayland player. So they just have some cool themes. But,
Spags has a question. Have you given any thought to the idea of an ongoing storyline, or bringing in the elements similar to what him and I experienced when we were younger playing L5R, where the players may have some ability to influence storyline?
So I think that's actually a really great point, and that's something that... So there is a storyline that is already like in the process of being done. I'm not going to give any like big spoilers, but I'll say was originally one, and there was just a second one added. 2 like butterfly effect moments that kind of split FFG's timeline and our timeline. And so I really hope people like it. And that said, I absolutely think doing something similar to like the 14K and Los Scorpiones thing that they did at Magnum Opus, maybe not making such busted cards, but having stuff like that influence the future direction of the story arcs, I think would be really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have another question for you. Is there a card that you would bring back from rotation?
So, there's a very distinct difference in what I would personally love to see back and what is actually a good idea to see back. Like I said before, like my best memories of playing this game were when the pre-rotation butcher shop was a thing. Like, I absolutely know it was not balanced and it was not healthy for the game. So I wouldn't say like to bring those back for real. If I was to bring back anything for real, like that I actually think could be healthy to keeping the game going, I think Katie Jones would be really great.
Yeah.
I love my girl Katie. Who else? What else?
You know what? I was thinking about this in between the Alice interview and tonight's interview. You know what's a card I really, really miss?
What's that?
John Masanori. John
Masanori. Oh yes, he was such a well-designed card, I think, because it's like he gave you some good tempo benefit if you made use of him, but then there was like a fair little punishment, like a little tempo hit if you failed the run or whatever. Like, I think he was so well designed,
and he had great themes. He was helping you out,
and he had fantastic
but
themes.
He was also like on Tinder while he was helping you, so there's a chance that they'd be able to backdoor through his system.
Indians
to find
looking
you.
Here like, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. He was fantastic.
So when if people, obviously, I'm not saying that you should volunteer yourself
Oh yes, and
to.
Corroder. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not
Someone in
saying
chat mentioned Corroder.
you volunteer to just have your inbox flooded with people's ideas of what they think should be in the lore, because everybody's got an opinion on basically what every board member should be doing. But if
Yeah.
people wanted to volunteer and, you know, work in earnest on some of the writing, is there a method for them to do that? How do they do that?
So currently we're working on implementing all of the, like, I guess, proper methods of doing so. As it stands right now, I 1,000,000% would love to hear anything anyone has to contribute. I've had a few people send me like quick little fan fictions they've done, and I love it, and I really want to include as much of that as possible because I think there's so many talented like writers and designers in the community, and so there will be a more streamlined method soon, I think. For right now, you can honestly just link it to me on Facebook or Twitter, or we have the email Project NISEI at Gmail. And pretty much any of those ways, like, I will get to see it. And I absolutely would love for people to flood my inbox with that kind of stuff.
And for those of you who may not be familiar with Holly on Twitter, you're at Break1Barrier, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yep.
Like Quetzal.
Yeah, like Quetzal, exactly. So I think we really dug into a lot of what you can reveal at this point, because obviously my point, as much as I want the details, is not to get you to reveal spoilers or details before they're ready. But what plugs, announcements would you like to get out to the community at this point? I linked as part of this, the StimHack link to all of the NISEI press releases and the NISEI Twitter. But is there any plugs or anything that you'd like to make sure that the community knows about before we close today?
I think the biggest thing is, even if you're not necessarily wanting to like commit to the super competitive scene still, like definitely keep an eye on the Twitter and on the posts, because we have a lot more. I think we have a lot more like planned and in the works than some people worry we do. So like organized play is definitely continuing at all levels that it currently is. And we've got a lot of really cool stuff that I think people will be pleasantly surprised with. And also, if you've never taken a look at some of the wonderful like artists in this community, Patrick Burke, Kat Shen, who else? Oh gosh.
Now you're blanking.
I'm blanking. There's one specific other artist I met at Magnum Opus, and my name is completely blanking right now, but there's so many like really talented artists that if you are interested in just seeing some like flavor and some cool takes on the world and some cool takes on the aesthetics, like there's so many people you should absolutely look up. Just check out the Artist Colony channel on Stim Slack, or they post them to dorks all the time, but support your artists because they're great.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. The advice that we haven't the last one of these that I did was right before we went to Worlds.
Alexis, thank you, Alexis Spicer.
Yeah. But I'm going to say what I was saying basically constantly Saturday night and Sunday night as people asked me if I was going to continue playing Netrunner, which the answer is yes.
Oh, absolutely.
We're in no different position right now than we would be after any Worlds. We'd be waiting 7 months for a pack anyway. We wouldn't have a single press release from FFG until December. And from what I'm hearing from interacting with the Future channel and interacting with everybody on the board is y'all are fast tracking, pun intended, a lot of stuff more rapidly than we would normally get it, because you're not waiting on a CEO's approval to put it out. So exactly. I'm excited because this is exactly the same. We're in a good meta, post Worlds, it's Janksgiving. keep going your meetups and keep playing and just wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think a lot of the doomsday callers are hopefully going to eat their words.
And let everybody know that now is the time to get back into the game. The people that we lost during Mumbad's cycle or when Cypher was a problem, now you don't even have to be full card pool to play, because now you can play with proxies.
Yes, Nisei will always be allowing proxies, so...
Yep. But yeah, so any other announcements that you want to make before we close tonight?
I think that's the extent of everything for right now.
What's on your T-shirt? I can't see it. I can see the top of it.
It's my werewolf boyfriend shirt.
Oh,
Hang on, let
cute.
me make sure I'm on camera here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
my
cute.
werewolf boyfriend shirt.
Yeah, I like it. But yeah, Holly, thank you so much for coming on the channel. I really appreciate you taking time out of your evening to come hang out.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for having Alice and everyone. We really appreciate getting to interact with the community.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. All of you are doing very exciting things to help move this game forward. Don't quote me on this, everybody watching, but I believe that I'm going to try to have as my next guest the director of organized play. So that'll be an exciting next interview. And thank you, everybody, for popping in with questions and comments. Keep an eye on this playlist. And please, I linked the NISEI on StimHack and also the Twitter for Project NISEI. Keep up with what's going on. I don't think that you're going to be disappointed. Holly, again, thank you so much for coming on. And everybody watching at home, until we see you again, always be running.
Always be running.